In the year 1324, a man named Mansa Musa walked across the desert with so much gold that the very weight of his generosity shook the world. Markets collapsed. Cities from Cairo to Medina felt the tremor of sudden wealth, and for a decade the value of money itself was broken. Historians say he carried more than 60,000 people and 100 camels on that famous pilgrimage to Mecca. They say he gave away 200 tons of gold along the way. Yet even that number leaves us with a haunting question. If Mali produced 50 tons of gold each year, and Musa ruled for 25 years, where did the rest go? Where is the missing treasure of Africa? For centuries, colonial historians dismissed these doubts. They told the world that Africans exaggerated, that stories of endless gold were fantasy. But the people of West Africa did not forget. Griots, the keepers of memory, sang their songs across generations. They carried not only tales of warriors and lovers, but also whispers of numbers, fragments of a code. Those fragments traveled across families and across borders, waiting for someone to listen with the right ears. The mystery of Musa's lost gold survived not in libraries, but in the voices of ordinary men and women. Now, in the heart of Burkina Faso, a new figure has entered this story. Ibrahim Traoré, trained as an engineer and tested as a leader, stands at the crossroads of past and future. He does not carry the crown of Musa, but he carries the burden of choice. The Sahel today is not the Mali of old, yet the question remains the same. What is the true treasure of Africa, and who will protect it? For a grandmother in Ouagadougou, telling bedtime stories to her grandchildren, the question is not about treasure maps or hidden caves. It is about safety, dignity, and whether the next generation will inherit hope or despair. For Americans who remember the Cold War, Vietnam, or September 11th, this story feels familiar. It is about security versus justice, sovereignty versus unity. If you had to choose between justice and security for your family, which would come first, and why? But what if the greatest African treasure is not buried under the desert at all, but hidden in the choices leaders must make today? In the middle of the 14th century, the Mali Empire stood at the height of its power. Its mines along the Niger River supplied more gold than any other part of the known world. The name of its ruler, Mansa Musa, still echoes through history as the wealthiest man who ever lived. His journey to Mecca in 1324 is remembered as one of the most dramatic demonstrations of wealth ever recorded. Chroniclers wrote that he traveled with 60,000 attendants and 100 camels, each loaded with gold dust and ingots. As he moved through Cairo and Medina, he gave so freely that local economies collapsed under the sudden flood of wealth. For nearly 10 years, the value of money in Egypt and the Arabian Peninsula was broken because of one man's generosity. Yet the numbers do not add up. If Musa truly distributed 200 tons of gold on that journey, it should have represented only a fraction of Mali's reserves. Historians estimate that the empire produced about 50 tons of gold each year. Musa ruled for 25 years. Even with conservative calculations, that should have left more than 1,000 tons of gold still unaccounted for. Where did it go? Was it hidden deliberately, consumed in trade, or scattered across unrecorded channels? This puzzle became a shadow that followed every retelling of Musa's story. For centuries, colonial historians brushed aside the question. They insisted that African records were unreliable, that tales of endless treasure were exaggerations. But across villages, griots, the guardians of oral history, kept repeating songs filled with strange fragments. These were not only poems about warriors or lovers, but sequences of numbers, melodies that rose and fell in patterns. Generations passed them down without fully understanding their meaning. For those who listened carefully, the fragments hinted at something larger. 14 families, spread across Mali, Guinea, Niger, Senegal, Mauritania, Ivory Coast, and Burkina Faso, each kept a part of the sequence. Together, they formed a mystery that survived centuries of conquest, colonization, and silence. In recent years, the whispers found new weight. Ibrahim Traoré, an engineer before he became a leader, grew fascinated by these contradictions. He knew the calculations. He had studied the empire's history, the trade routes, and the manuscripts of Timbuktu. He also carried the burden of leading a nation caught between poverty and potential. For him, the question of Musa's gold was not only about treasure, it was about dignity. If Africa's past wealth was real, what did it mean for the present? If knowledge and resources had once been hidden away, could they be reclaimed for today's children? Imagine a wedding in a village not far from Timbuktu. Among the drums and laughter, an old griot begins to sing. At first, the verses are familiar, stories everyone knows. Then the melody shifts, and numbers spill out in rhythm. Many guests laugh uneasily, but Traoré sits upright. His engineering mind catches the pattern. The song is not random. It is a code. The griot explains that his family has guarded one of the 14 fragments since the time of Musa himself. The instruction was always the same: preserve, but never pursue. Sing, but never explain. Yet now, in a world where Africa struggles for stability, the temptation to pursue grows stronger. From that moment, the idea of hidden gold became more than a legend. It became a possibility that demanded attention. Was there really a network of songs that pointed to a secret reserve? If so, who should seek it, and who should benefit from it? The question was dangerous. If it became public, foreign powers would hear. Rumors would spread. The fragile trust of ordinary people might be broken. Traoré understood that even the hint of treasure could bring intervention, competition, and violence. Still, the pull of history was powerful. The thought that Musa's wealth might still lie beneath the desert raised hopes as well as fears. The event is not simply about a lost fortune. It is about the rediscovery of memory and the claim of ownership. For the people of Burkina Faso and the wider Sahel, it touches the nerve of justice. For Americans watching from afar, it recalls the debates of the Cold War and beyond. Who controls resources? Who writes history? And who ensures that wealth, once found, serves families rather than powers? If gold had the power to break economies in the 14th century, what would it mean if it surfaced again in the 21st? What is waiting to be uncovered is not just a treasure of coins and ingots, but a test of character. The question remains unsettled. If the missing gold of Mansa Musa truly exists, it may not only change Africa's destiny, but also reshape the balance of power across the world. Picture the northern plains of Burkina Faso on a quiet morning. The marketplace is still, the stalls half empty. Aminata, a fruit seller, arranges a few baskets of mangoes with care. Her radio is playing softly in the background. It is not music, but a news report. The announcer's voice is heavy with sorrow. He speaks of villages attacked, of families displaced, of lives ended without warning. Since May, Human rights groups have counted dozens of civilians killed in separate assaults. For Aminata, each statistic feels like a shadow cast over her children. She asks herself the same question every day. Who will protect ordinary families when both rebels and soldiers seem capable of harm? It is here, in these small and personal moments, that politics becomes real. Leaders gather in conference halls and speak of sovereignty. International observers issue reports filled with technical language. But for mothers and grandmothers, the question is simple. Will the next day bring safety, or will it bring fear? This is why the withdrawal of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger from the International Criminal Court struck such a deep chord. To some, it was a reclaiming of dignity, a rejection of outside interference. To others, it was a door closing on accountability, leaving victims without recourse. Reactions in the streets were divided. Some celebrated, lifting flags and chanting of independence. They said the ICC had failed Africa, that it had focused too often on African leaders while ignoring crimes committed elsewhere. They believed that dignity required a break from biased institutions. Others whispered doubts. If both state forces and armed groups are accused of abuses, who speaks for the voiceless when the global court is gone? Silence grew heavier than any speech. Families like Aminata's felt caught between pride and fear, between hope for self-determination and worry about impunity. International reactions added another layer of complexity. Western newspapers framed the move as dangerous, warning of greater instability and less oversight. African commentators often saw those warnings as hypocrisy, pointing to interventions and double standards that scarred the continent for decades. For older American viewers, this tension feels familiar. Many lived through the Cold War, through Vietnam, through the War on Terror. They remember the promises of justice and the realities of power. They recall debates at kitchen tables about whether security or freedom mattered more, and whether one could survive without the other. This emotional crest is not only about legal institutions. It is about the dignity of ordinary people who have lived too long with violence. It is about whether history is repeating itself in the Sahel, or whether a new path can emerge. Aminata's story is not unique. Across the region, teachers, farmers, and elders are asking the same questions. They are not experts in law or politics, but they know the value of peace and the cost of its absence. Their voices rise above statistics because they are grounded in lived experience. If we look closer, we see that the story is not one-sided. Pride and fear exist side by side, often within the same person. A father may cheer the rejection of colonial influence in public, but in private, he wonders whether justice will vanish for his family. A student may post on social media about sovereignty, then confess to a friend that she worries her generation will inherit chaos. These contradictions are not weaknesses. They are the essence of what it means to live at a turning point in history. For viewers in America who are over 60, these emotions may resonate deeply. You remember when news of faraway places shaped daily life at home. You remember when wars overseas affected the price of food and the future of your children. The Sahel today is distant, but the questions are familiar. Who guards justice when institutions fail? Who protects families when violence spreads? And when leaders speak of sovereignty, do they mean protection for the people or power for themselves? If gold and manuscripts symbolize Africa's hidden wealth, then Aminata's story symbolizes Africa's hidden pain and strength. Both are treasures, and both demand recognition. The true emotional crest of this story is not found in chambers of gold beneath a mountain, but in the fragile heartbeat of families waiting for safety. The question remains unresolved. If global courts step back and national power steps in, who will carry the voice of the victims? In July of 2025, Burkina Faso made a decision that rippled far beyond its borders. The government dissolved the Independent National Election Commission and transferred its responsibilities to the Ministry of the Interior. On paper, it was described as an administrative reform meant to streamline the process. Supporters said it would save resources, reduce duplication, and prevent outside interference. Critics, however, saw something different. They feared that the fragile promise of free and fair elections had been weakened, and that power had tilted further into the hands of those already in control. For ordinary families, the change did not feel like a bureaucratic adjustment. It felt like another sign that trust was slipping away. A teacher in Wahiguya shared her worry with neighbors. She explained that her children had grown up hearing promises of democratic transition, but now those promises seemed more distant. Would her students live to cast a vote that truly mattered? Or would elections become symbols rather than guarantees? Her fear was not abstract. She had seen students disappear when conflict reached their villages. She had seen bright young men leave for Europe because they lost hope at home. Every headline about political reform carried the weight of personal loss. The dissolution of this commission came at a time of rising insecurity. Attacks on civilians in the north displaced thousands. Families fled their homes, leaving behind farms and schools. In villages once vibrant with trade and community gatherings, silence took hold. Markets closed. Teachers could no longer hold classes. Children sat restless in makeshift camps, their laughter fading into whispers. Each act of violence deepened the sense that institutions could not protect those they were meant to serve. When people no longer believe in safety, they also stop believing in promises. The political fallout did not stop at national borders. In the region, neighbors watched closely. Some governments applauded the decision, seeing in it a reflection of their own struggle for control and sovereignty. Others worried that it would further destabilize the Sahel, a region already fragile from overlapping conflicts. International observers voiced concern, but their voices often sounded distant, echoing through reports and press conferences rather than through direct help. To families like Aminata's in the marketplace, those reports were irrelevant. What mattered was whether the roads to their villages were open and whether their children could sleep without fear. There is a deeper danger when institutions lose credibility. Trust is the invisible currency of every society. It binds citizens to leaders, neighbors to one another, and generations to the future. When that trust breaks, money loses value, words lose weight, and even prayers feel uncertain. In Burkina Faso, the erosion of trust is not measured only in political polls, but in daily choices. Families hide savings under mattresses rather than in banks. Young people speak less about building futures at home, and more about leaving. Elders whisper that the promises of stability are illusions. These choices accumulate until a nation's foundation feels hollow. For older American viewers, the erosion of trust in institutions may feel familiar. You have seen moments in your own country when confidence in government weakened, whether during Vietnam, Watergate, or the wars of the Middle East. You remember how fragile democracy can feel when leaders appear distant and when promises do not match reality. That memory may help you understand the quiet despair spreading across the Sahel. The geography is different, but the human experience is the same. The political fallout also reshapes international engagement. Western nations see instability in Burkina Faso as both a security risk and a moral challenge. Terrorist networks thrive where governments are weak. Migration pressures grow when young people lose hope. Yet every intervention carries the weight of history. Africans remember colonial powers dictating their futures, and they remain wary of promises wrapped in foreign aid. Sovereignty is cherished, but sovereignty without stability can turn into isolation. The debate is not only about law, but about survival. At the heart of this fallout lies a question that refuses to fade. When a government consolidates control in the name of sovereignty, does it protect its people, or does it silence them? When families lose trust in institutions, what remains to hold society together? Perhaps it is faith. Perhaps it is community elders. Perhaps it is nothing at all. The answer is not yet clear, but the risk is heavy. Trust, once broken, is the hardest treasure to reclaim. If institutions bend toward sovereignty and away from accountability, what happens to the people who depend on them most? What happens to children who long for schools, to mothers who long for safety, to elders who long for dignity? And what happens to nations when the fragile thread of trust finally snaps? When news of changes in Burkina Faso reached Washington, Brussels, and Paris, policymakers paid close attention. To many, the Sahel is more than a distant region. It is a fragile belt stretching across Africa, where terrorism, migration, and global competition intersect. For the United States, the stakes are not only about Africa, but also about its own security. A Sahel that is unstable can provide safe havens for extremist groups. It can also increase migration pressures that ripple into Europe and affect the transatlantic alliance. American officials read the headlines about Burkina Faso leaving the International Criminal Court and dissolving its election commission with concern. To them, these were not isolated choices. They looked like signs of a broader shift away from international institutions toward military-centered governance. The fear in Washington was simple. If governments close the door on global accountability, what incentive remains to prevent abuses or to protect civilians? Behind closed doors, these questions were discussed in think tanks and congressional hearings. Yet for families in the United States who remember Vietnam, Iraq, or Afghanistan, the question feels familiar. What happens when the promise of justice collides with the hard realities of conflict? France, with its long and complicated history in West Africa, reacted defensively. Critics accused Paris of trying to preserve influence at all costs, while leaders insisted that they were only concerned with stability. The European Union debated sanctions and aid adjustments, torn between principles and pragmatism. China observed with calculation, offering infrastructure projects in exchange for access to resources. Russia promised security assistance, presenting itself as a reliable partner in a world of shifting alliances. The competition among great powers made the Sahel a stage for global strategy, as much as a home for local families. For older Americans, this may sound like echoes of the Cold War, when faraway regions became battlegrounds for influence. The difference today is that Africa is speaking with a stronger voice of sovereignty. Leaders like Ibrahim Traoré are insisting that partnerships must be based on respect rather than control. They are rejecting offers that come with hidden chains, and they are demanding fair trade rather than dependency. The world is now watching to see if this new posture will bring lasting stability or greater isolation. For the United States, the challenge is to engage without repeating the mistakes of the past. If trust is to be rebuilt, it must be built on transparency and respect. If it fails, the Sahel may become another symbol of opportunities lost. The story of Mansa Musa and the choices of Ibrahim Traoré remind us that wealth alone cannot define a nation. Gold can be measured in tons and stored in vaults, but the true measure of a people lies in how they share what they have. In the 14th century, Musa's generosity changed economies across continents. In the 21st century, the question is not whether hidden treasure exists, but whether unity and trust can endure in a region scarred by violence and suspicion. The Sahel today is more than a place on a map. It is a test of character. Families seek safety, children need education, and elders hope for dignity in their final years. Political institutions can rise or fall, but the human need for justice never disappears. If leaders fail to uphold that justice, then no amount of sovereignty will bring peace. The decision of Burkina Faso to turn away from international courts and to centralize power is not only a political maneuver. It is a signal to the world that Africa is searching for its own path. The question is whether that path will lead to unity or division. For Americans watching from afar, this moment carries echoes of history. Many remember the struggles of their own nation when principles clashed with fear. You remember the tension between freedom and security, between law and necessity. Those memories can help us understand what is at stake for families in the Sahel. They remind us that choices made in distant lands can shape the balance of peace and justice across the world. As we close this story, let us imagine the words of Mansa Musa written in the manuscripts of old. "Gold," he said, "is like water in the desert. If one man holds it all, he will drown. If it is shared, all will survive the journey." These words are not only about treasure, they are about wisdom. They are about the bond that ties communities together. If this story has touched your sense of justice or stirred your memories of what kept your family safe, share that reflection. Your voice may guide others who are searching for meaning in a time of uncertainty. Long after the coins are spent and the manuscripts are read, the true treasure will be measured in unity, dignity, and faith. May wisdom and mercy guide leaders from Ouagadougou to Washington, and may every family find peace in the choices of tomorrow.